Hello, this is Angela with Parker's Permaculture. I am sitting in the shade of my Desert King fig here at the back of my orchard in my permaculture garden in Portland, Oregon. You can hear all the scratching and clucking and quacking around me. I am sitting down here feeding the chickens an afternoon snack of kitchen scraps, and they are having a grand old time. So as I'm sitting down here, enjoying hanging out with my ducks and chickens, enjoying the lovely shade on this warm July afternoon, I thought, let's talk about a little hidden secret gem in permaculture that I think needs to get folded into the regular conversation a little bit more often. So in permaculture, we have 3 ethics: care for the earth, care for people, and fair share, which is sometimes called equitable use and distribution of resources. Those 3 ethics drive everything that we do in permaculture. They drive all of our design choices. We think about, is this caring for the earth? Is this caring for my fellow human beings? And am I using more resources than I need? Am I hoarding resources when nature needs them or other people need them to have an improved and sustainable quality of life? I'm gonna scooch back here because there's a chicken pecking my toe. Hey, cut it out. So permaculture has these 3 ethics, and I really try and think about them when I make choices in my life, particularly the 3rd one. And I know I owe everybody a comprehensive video on the 3rd ethic because boy, oh boy, it's real controversial. And I keep meaning to make it, and I once again keep getting busy with other subjects and other things going on in my personal life and in my garden life. So perhaps once the rainy weather returns, I will sit down in my living room on a very rainy day and break down the 3rd ethic of share the surplus, because it's so important for us to understand permaculture. So there is a 4th ethic in permaculture, which is sometimes called the hidden or secret ethic. And it further supports the first 3 ethics and also is a really empowering concept. And I think that if it were presented to us along with the other 3 more frequently, and I think if it were widely embraced as a cornerstone of permaculture, permaculture would be much more approachable for a lot of people. The 4th ethic is sometimes called the transitional ethic, or transition takes time. The transitional ethic is maybe not so catchy as the other 3. Earth care, people care, fair share, all tie in really nicely. It's a nice little bundle you can present to people. So maybe y'all could help me come up with a way to talk about transition as a 4th ethic that can be a neat little package with the other 3. But right now I'm not coming up with something. So what is the transitional ethic? What is transition takes time? I talk a lot on this channel about how permaculture has to happen in the real world. It doesn't happen in someone's design class. It doesn't happen in their permaculture design certificate course. It doesn't happen in a textbook or some idealized site plan. It happens in the real world with real people and real hiccups, and the fact that we have to exist in a society that is not resilient, that is not in any way regenerative. Because permaculture is a design system pushing to move us toward a resilient way of living, a way that is truly sustainable and truly cares for the earth and people, and has a fair share of resources so that no one and no place goes without. And because we are seeking to push that kind of change in a culture that is antagonistic toward sustainability and resilience, we can't act too quickly. So the transitional ethic says, let's be patient with each other and let's take our time. You can't go from living a consumerist, consumptive, extractive lifestyle on which most of us have been raised, right? We've been indoctrinated with that our entire lives. You cannot rapidly jump from that to a zero waste, truly sustainable, and then eventually regenerative way of living in the blink of an eye by snapping your fingers. Even if you really want to, it's not that simple. doubly so because we exist in a society that is not set up for regeneration. All right, quick break there for my neighbors to finish using their shop vac. So I think it's really important for us to remember that transition takes time. Permaculture has 12 principles that all underlie and bolster and support not only our design system, but the 3 ethics. And one of those principles is slow, small solutions. So I know sometimes in permaculture, folks can get kind of competitive about how sustainable they are. And I've made a video on this in the past about perfection and permaculture. There is no permaculture Olympics. It doesn't exist. There is no self-righteousness in permaculture. There is no, you aren't a real permaculturist because you don't do X perfectly. And this is what the transition ethic speaks to. It tells us that we need time to make changes. We need slow, small solutions to be truly, truly sustainable. And that we can't rush that process. And trying to rush that process means we're going to make mistakes along the way. We're going to stress ourselves out. And also trying to rush that process and tell other people and tell all of society that we have to move to a post-carbon world and we have to move toward truly sustainable design and we have to dump plastics. We have to have local food sources. All of that is going to overwhelm a system that is completely committed to the exact opposite. And it's going to mean people aren't going to want to engage in permaculture. It's going to mean that people are going to see it as too difficult, too onerous, and too much of a commitment. So when we look at this 4th ethic of transition takes time, we know that we can take baby steps towards sustainability and we can feel really good about our successes. We can feel really good about the fact that we're on a journey and we're moving toward true resilience. The journey is as important as the destination. So let's think about 3 different ways we can manifest this ethic. We can think about it and we can apply it to our journey in permaculture. The first one is having a change of our culinary expectations. Transition means that we are taking steps toward creating a regenerative and sustainable food system that does not exploit our farm laborers and it does not exploit the planet. A lot of that means transitioning to a more diverse diet. Americans eat a very narrow range of foods. Most of those are grown in a highly exploitive manner. So taking time to adjust your palate to an array of new flavors, to the local cuisine, to the foods that maybe you've never eaten before, but thrive in your climate and can be grown in a resilient way. Transitioning out of the habit that Americans have of eating whatever we want, whenever we want, any time of year. And transitioning to seasonal eating. This, for our family, was a process that took several years where I told my kids we don't actually buy tomatoes in the grocery store in the winter. We either eat the ones that we've dried and canned and use the sauces and salsa that we've frozen, or we do without. We only eat fresh tomatoes when they are in season in our garden. We don't buy them any other time of year. That means if we have hamburgers in the winter, they don't have tomato slices on them. Focusing on seasonal eating and using local producers is a huge transition for most Americans. We're used to having whatever we want flown in from Chile, from Mexico, from Hawaii, and being completely oblivious to the carbon footprint and the high cost to the environment and to us as people of eating those kinds of foods. But it's really difficult for us to make that jump immediately. For me to decide, like a lot of the trendy books and blogs and YouTube channels out there, I'm going to eat 100% locavore diet and 100% seasonal diet. It's actually really difficult to do and sustain it for any period of time. And in permaculture, we are looking for long-term sustainability. So you do these experiments and they are really radical and you really just dive in and then you burn out. That's not what the 4th ethic says. The 4th ethic says transition slowly, take your time and adapt, and you won't burn out. You will fold these behaviors into your life and normalize them, and that way they become sustainable. So take the time to think about changing your palate over the long term, changing your cooking habits from convenience foods and how you prepare food to a more seasonal local diet. And you'll find that in my experience, it helps me keep my food budget even tighter, but it does change the way I eat, and it changes how I have to be intentional about my eating and food preparation because I don't use convenience food. But all of that was a slow process over many years for my family. So the second way, after taking time to transition our culinary expectations, we need to transition the way we think about using and reusing materials. This may not be exactly what you're thinking, because in our culture, we find that sustainability is marketed to us very heavily, and we're told the way that we become truly sustainable is by buying biodegradable products, buying whatever is marketed to us that we are told is green, bamboo toothbrushes and new green cleaners, things like that. But actually in permaculture, we think about how even if things aren't perfectly sustainable, if they've already been fabricated, if they've already been created, sometimes we're better off using those until they wear out than investing in new green options. Because we need to look at the total energy cost for an item. It's not only the energy cost of disposing of it, it's all of the energy that went into making it, and then all of the energy that went into making the equipment that made the item, and then looking at all of the energy to transport that item. So a lot of times the more sustainable option is looking what we have around us and using it up before we spend resources on fabricating new items, even if those items are supposed to be green. So don't buy into the consumerist myth that in order to be sustainable, you have to chuck everything in your household into the landfill and start over again buying a new wardrobe entirely out of natural fibers and kitchen and laundry supplies, all natural biodegradable, and radically throw away all of your storage containers and everything in your kitchen and purchase everything new glass and lead-free china. You don't have to do that. In order to work toward the slow transition, use what you have until it wears out. And then if you can't return it to the earth, put it in the landfill or recycle it, and then think about investing in some sustainable, non-polluting materials. The prime example of this, by the way, is using the houses that we already have. I have a 1922 little cottage. It is not set up with permaculture design. It is not built using permaculture materials, sustainable materials in many ways. I am going to use the house that I have. It makes no sense for me to tear it down and take all of those perfectly usable, habitable resources and put them in the dump in order to build a green, passive solar, eco, all using repurposed and locally sourced materials house for an extravagant amount of money. That is not good permaculture. Good permaculture, use the materials that you have. As they wear out, slowly transition to the ones that are in alignment with permaculture principles. The third thing to think about is using appropriate technology, and this sort of ties into appropriate materials. Permaculture is not anti-technology, whatever you've been told. And one thing that the transition ethic talks about is using appropriate technology, especially if we have technology that already exists, but maybe is still a little bit polluting or is not in keeping with permaculture design. Should we chuck that technology, or should we use it until we use it up? A prime example is I use a chainsaw. Using gas-powered appliances is not particularly in keeping with permaculture design. Using anything powered by petroleum, not such great permaculture, but I already have a chainsaw. I've already invested in it. It really saves me a lot of labor, and it helps me in setting up permaculture systems with much less work on my part. I really conserve time by using my chainsaw instead of my handsaw. And will I buy a new chainsaw when this one wears out? Probably not, but will I keep using it until it is all worn out? Yes, I will. Another great example is that we live in a system that is often not set up for public transport. Portland has pretty great public transport. If you have a large family like I do, it's not cost effective. And often we don't have time in our schedules to ride the bus for hours a day. Most of us use cars. most of us in many cities, or especially in rural areas, are not equipped to have a car-free life. Perhaps some of those of you who live in a more densely populated area and in smaller countries can get around better by bicycle. But for most folks where I live, it's really difficult, actually. And so while we set up our lives to transition to ones free of using petroleum and free of automobiles, why don't we use the automobiles we have and drive them until the wheels fall off? For me, I found it means I can transport materials and prepare my property to be more sustaining in the long term, which I couldn't do if I didn't have a minivan. Number 4, the transition ethic helps us think about how we need time to build good infrastructure. Give ourselves permission to transition over to regenerative ways of living over a period of time. Let's not rush it, yet let's use our slow, small solutions. Not only does this allow us to transition society to present permaculture to a greater society at an approachable pace, to help individuals acclimate to changes and give our culture and our society time to build resilient infrastructure, it makes it all seem so much more approachable and doable. We are presenting people with bite-sized bites of permaculture instead of stuffing it down their throats. I'll say that in permaculture, when we continue to transition slowly and use things that already exist that may not be perfectly sustainable, we may not transition to a perfectly local and regeneratively produced restoration agriculture diet right off the bat. We may end up using materials that still utilize petroleum and plastic. That's okay, but let's think about planning a future where we can repair, we can upcycle, and we can have really user-friendly design. Let's think about having good permaculture design for our end goal in the future, and then let's think about the fact that the journey of transition to that goal in the future is also good permaculture and also requires its own design plan that is separate from the end goal. So I encourage you to think about and embrace the 4th hidden ethic that kind of lingers quietly in the background of permaculture. Think how you can take the concept of transition and using your time to sustainably move from extractive practices to ones that are in keeping with permaculture principles. And by using slow, small solutions, by taking the time to transition slowly, intentionally, and ingrain new patterns of behavior, find new systems to source things, take the time to do it right, and you'll find that you don't burn out. Permaculture feels really approachable, and you can celebrate each step along the way. Each milestone is a measure of success and a reason to celebrate. And it's not all about the end destination, it is about the journey. So check out that 4th permaculture ethic, think how you can apply it to your life, and enjoy the process of doing so. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up. Please consider subscribing to my channel and check out my Patreon in the description. I'll be back later this week with more about permaculture design, gardening, poultry keeping, and sustainable agriculture. Thanks.